Welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM channel 130. Of course, our radio show is also a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org or directly to wherever you listen to your podcast. Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Mary Fiorito.
And we are happy to have another colleague of yours, Mary, Ryan Anderson, back with us today. He is the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And we're fresh off the news of his book, When Harry Became Sally, now being back on Amazon. And we're also going to discuss all things executive orders, everything going on, as well as the new pro-family policy agenda on the future of technology coming out of your organization. So welcome back to the show, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
So I got to admit, I'm amazed the way these technology companies just kind of go where the winds blow. I mean, I just saw today that Google Calendar is like deleting every, woke thing except just federal holidays. But the thing that I was happy to see was that Amazon has reinstated after 5 years the sale of your book. Tell us about that. Were you surprised, happy?
Yeah, so it's an interesting backstory because what happened was when I saw the picture of Jeff Bezos at Trump's inauguration, and Trump famously said during the inauguration, now that I'm president, we'll go back to there only being two sexes, male and female. And it was like one of the biggest applause lines. I was like, wait a minute, like Bezos is there, like, getting in all these pictures, the president's declaring there are only two sexes, and yet like his company still bans my book. So I just like sarcastically tweeted out, like, does this mean my book will be for sale again?
Oh.
And then like some people saw it, and actually it was one of Mary's and my colleague, Henry Olson. He was like, you guys should really make a push to like make this happen. So we ended up, another one of our colleagues wrote a piece for the Federalist because we know like that's an outlet that's very influential within the Trump administration. They read a lot of the things coming out of the Federalist. And so he just wrote a piece saying, wait, the headline was like the woke fever broke. So why is Amazon still banning Ryan Anderson's book? And then another one of our colleagues, Ed Whalen, had a post at Bench Memos on National Review saying, wait a minute, one of Trump's executive orders said that, all of government should be defunding gender ideology. Amazon is like over a $1 billion a year federal contractor with the Department of Defense. If the Department of Defense says we're not going to be doing contracts with people who punish people who believe the truth about our embodiment as male and female, like does Amazon really want to put that at risk? So anyway, so this is all kind of like in the Twitter sphere or the X sphere. And then the new Trump appointed chair of the FTC, he quote tweets me saying, this is an interesting question. I'd like to know the answer to my tweet about whether or not Amazon will sell the book. So he does that on like a Friday afternoon. And then the next week, I think it was like a Wednesday morning, I get a text message from a friend of mine who I imagine you both know, who's a former Senate staffer. And he's like the lobbyist from Amazon who always would come pay me a visit. He just texted me the link to your book back on Amazon. It's for sale again. Because apparently when the lobbyists would visit Republican senators and Republican members of the House, like one of the number one questions they were asked was about conservative censorship and why Amazon is, prohibiting a very popular conservative book. So they knew they had a problem. I'm happy it's back for sale, but like, look, it's transparently political. They sold the book for 3 years when Trump was in the White House. They got rid of the book February of 2021. So a month after Joe Biden was inaugurated. They returned the book to sale February of 2025, right? A month after Trump's inaugurated. The statement they put out is still kind of pathetic. Because it says, this is a tough judgment call. Like, we have to balance free speech and hate speech. And like, this book is like right on the cusp and we're probably overprotective for you. Like, no, there's nothing like remotely in the book that is even borderline on hate speech. Anyway, like there's a certain type of conservative author who writes something or who does a talk on campus hoping to get canceled. So then that person can go on Fox News and talk about how they got canceled. Like, that's not the way I approach any of my books, whether it was like on marriage, religious liberty, transgender stuff, abortion. Anyway, for Amazon to then try to claim like, oh yeah, this is a bomb throwing red meat hate speech book. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to make it seem like it was a tough call whether or not to bring it back.
Well, I have to say, I thought of you on Sunday and something my mother used to say all the time, which was, God's timing is always perfect.
Mm.
And when God's your vindicator, it will be better than anything you could have done on your own. And when I saw the Harry Met Sally commercial, that reboot commercial, who could have predicted or planned that? Like right at the time when you need that movie, that name to come back
Yeah.
into common parlance, which it hasn't been for many years.
No.
Like I had to explain to my two young college age daughters what that meant and why it was funny. So just at the very same time, I
That's
thought,
great.
look how good God is. He's bringing all of this back at the same time. How is the book available now, Ryan? Is it only like an audiobook, or are there printed versions in
Yeah.
existence that people can buy?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, a couple of things to say there. One is that my publisher never wavered at all. So Encounter Books, Roger Kimball, it was really good that I did not have like a moral coward as my publisher. Like he was not gonna allow Amazon to censor him. So I mean, he's been selling the book directly through the Encounter Books website. Barnes and Noble also never canceled the book.
Yeah, it's been you could buy it there. I remember
You can
that.
get it
Yeah.
at Barnes and Noble. You could get like the iBook version if you wanted an ebook. Kindle, obviously, you couldn't get. Audible, you couldn't get. Paperback and hardback on Amazon, you couldn't get. And then they also banned the used books. So, Amazon had
Oh.
totally banned it for 4 years. But, the other retailers still sold it, and the
Right.
publisher sold it direct. So right now, it's interesting. Amazon, if you go to their webpage, it says they're out of stock. And so my guess is that when they brought it back,
Yeah.
I had tweeted it out, other people kind of celebratory tweets. People who heard about the book for the first time probably went to buy it on Amazon because that's where
Right.
80 some percent of people buy their books. And then Amazon obviously didn't have it in the warehouse because for the past 4 years, they weren't selling it. So my
Right.
guess is that like right now, Amazon is like doing a rush order of the book from the publisher to get it in the warehouse so then they can start shipping it out.
Well,
But it's a
that's-
great moment because like people are waking up to the fact
Yeah.
that on the transgender, like this is not the right side of history. Like the subtitle of the book was like responding to the transgender moment. Because I argue in the book and I wanted to signal to people, this is not like the next wave of human rights. The Joe Biden line, it's
Right.
not true. This will be a moment. We will look back on this in horror. And the only question is, how long does this moment last? And I wanted to like encourage people to do what they can to make this moment shorter in time because like they're real victims. They're real costs of getting human nature wrong. And we now see this cohort of young people, the detransitioners who have been, in Abigail Schreier's phrase, irreversibly damaged
Mhm.
by this medical scandal.
So that was going to be my next question. I remember the day after the election, my sister, who's in suburban Colorado, is kind of a limited issue voter, just loosely follows these things. And she said, I think this might mean transgender is over. Like, just, is this the end of being bombarded with all of this and just hearing about it? I think people are fatigued of hearing about it. And my question for you, and this is something I keep turning over in my head, is, has the fever broken just in terms of all of the woke censorship? Or is there a risk that, when the political tides change again, which they inevitably will, the kind of censorship and all of that could come back with a fury?
Both and yes and no. And what I mean by that is some of these issues are truly like 70-30, 80-20 issues.
Right.
Boys and girls sports. That photo op last week when President Trump signs that executive order keeping men out of women's sports. And he's surrounded by all of these female athletes, like little girl athletes, college athletes, like everyone in between. That is a photo op that the left wished they had. Right?
Mhm.
Trump is owning Title IX, which is, something that the left had been championing. I don't know a single soccer mom or Joe the plumber who wants boys in their daughter's sports or boys in their daughter's bathroom, right? And so I do think that some of this, it'll be very hard for whoever is running for president on the Democratic ticket in 2028 to say, I'm going to return boys and girls sports. Or now they might do some of this stuff sotto voce, because I mean, this is why I say it's a both and a yes and a no. The activist groups are not backing down, and the ideologues, the true believers, are not backing down. Many local public school systems are not going to comply with some of these Trump EOs, especially, once they get implemented through regulations. Some of the blue states are not backing down. California, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, where Mary is joining us from. So it's going to be kind of pockets. But I think the most important thing that has happened is that Trump has given permission to ordinary Americans to say the emperor has no clothes. The game plan the left had was they thought they were going to railroad us on this, that they had won gay marriage in June of 2015. In May of 2016, we got a whole bunch of executive orders and regulations from the Obama administration on transgender stuff. They thought Hillary Clinton was going to win in November of 2016, and this would be a fait accompli. And to their shame, a number of Christian communities never spoke out against the trans ideology because they were like, look, we spoke out against gay marriage. We got our teeth kicked in. Why are we going to now do it again? And the tide turned, right? At first it was just my book, but then it was Abigail Schreier's book. Then there were all sorts, J.K. Rowling was speaking out. Andrew Sullivan, right?
Martina Navratilova.
Yes. And once you got like this cascading effect of voices who you wouldn't expect criticizing it, and then the ad that Trump ran during like every college football game, every NFL Sunday game, she's for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. There's a reason that they ran that ad. It's effective. So all of which is to say, like, I think ordinary people now have permission to say what they've always believed. Hardcore ideologues on the left are going to continue to believe what they believe. I don't see at the national level the Dems explicitly running on this. I do see at the state and local level people still being bad. And we, as Catholics, we should acknowledge some of this has infiltrated the church. Some of this has infiltrated our schools. And so like it'll be important for the bishops, for priests, for pastors, for school principals to realize this is still in the culture. This is still what the kids are hearing on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram. And so it's not as if like, the war is over, mission accomplished. This is the beginning of the end. This is not the end of the end.
Yeah, no, I was going to say just, Ryan, you as a father, I think what Trump has tapped into, which is sort of just the natural law that's written on the hearts of men who are husbands and fathers. And they were essentially bullied into silence, and emasculated. And what I think President Trump did, like, for example, with that photo you just mentioned, having all the girls say, hey, come on, the Secret Service is wrong. None of you are going to hurt me. And it was so genuine and natural. And you could see a real desire on his part to protect them from something that was a threat to them. And I'm just sort of wondering how, you, again, as a dad yourself, is there a way in which he's approaching these and the other sort of social issues, I guess, that you feel is tapping into what was so much ignored in men for the last 4 years?
That's an interesting, I haven't thought about that explicitly, but I see what you're saying. And I think there's some truth to that. Even like there was, if you think about some of like the realignment issues within the Republican Party, up until the 2016 election, and even during the 2016 election, every other candidate except for Trump that year spoke much more about freedom and liberty and freedom and liberty. And Trump talked about, I'm going to be your protector. He talked much more about what he could do to protect people. And I think for a lot of people in our social milieu, freedom, liberty, it's worked out well for us. But for a lot of people, it hasn't. And I think Trump tapped into that. And I don't always necessarily agree with him, and I don't always know what I think about, some of the tariff stuff, the trade, where he's, somewhat turning up the apple cart on traditional Republican economic orthodoxy. But I think what resonates with people is they say Trump's fighting for us. Right? Trump is doing this to protect our jobs, or because why are we the world's policemen, or why, right or wrong? I think he's tapped into that sentiment that we were being taken advantage of as a country, and that prior iterations of politicians weren't looking out for you and I am. And there is kind of a masculine, fatherly aspect to it that I think resonates with people, which isn't to say he's always right, but he did, he was successful twice now. And I think that reveals something.
Ryan, I want to turn to a letter that was published in First Things that I know has ties to, well, you're a signatory, and we actually had one of the authors, Claire Morell, on last week. The letter is entitled A Future for the Family, a New Technology Agenda for the Right. And my understanding is that this is the fruit of a conference that the EPPC had in 2023. Tell us about your organization's role in this letter and how you see it as a part of a broader movement to try and wrest back AI technology and have it serve the
Yeah.
purposes of family.
Sure. I became president of EPPC right around 4 years ago. So it was right as the transition from Trump 1 to Biden was taking place. And one of the first people who I hired was Claire Morell to work on what we were then calling our big tech project. And, I had hired Claire before Amazon canceled my book, but, they had Twitter had kicked Trump off of Twitter. This is before Musk had bought Twitter. And one of the big concerns at the time was like big tech censorship of conservatives. Pro-lifers were being censored on Facebook and Twitter, traditional marriage people, gender ideology, like a whole host of areas where we were concerned about censorship. Section 230 was a big debate. Very quickly, we saw that's an interesting question, but like we're kind of like whistling past the graveyard, or like we're focusing on a tree and not the forest. And Claire wanted to pivot, and I thought it was a great idea, like much more on. So the new name of the project is Technology and Human Flourishing. Claire's the mother of 3 young kids, and she was saying the much more existential question is, what are all of these devices and social media apps doing to our kids? And she has a book coming out this spring with Penguin Random House called The Tech Exit, which is it's like a practical guidebook for parents on how to help their kids exit being overly reliant and dependent on technology, and how to have like a real childhood. But so the inspiration for the statement is that for the past 4 years, Claire has been working on like model legislation, age verification laws in the states before you could get a smartphone or before you could open social media, age verification for obscenity, for porn websites, right? And the idea is like, why is the brick and mortar world, the real world, more protective of kids than the online world? Especially since kids seem to be like just running wild with no supervision whatsoever in the online world, and they're bypassing parental authority, right? These technology companies can form a contract with my child, and that's what when you click on the terms of service, when you open a social media account, that's what you're in essence doing. And as a father, I have no say, right? So there was no parental consent, no age verification. All right. So then as she was working on this, it realized, look, there are even broader questions that modern technology raises beyond just children and, social media and smartphones and pornography. So Claire had pulled together like a working group. Out of that working group comes this statement. And, so there are 5 co-authors. 2 of them are EPPC fellows. One's a fellow at the Institute for Family Studies, one's at Heritage, and one's at, where's the last? The Foundation for American Innovation. He also teaches at CUA. I always think of John as a CUA professor. And so they just put together like a basic outline of 10 principles that policymakers and civil society leaders could think about how we should govern technology, not allow ourselves to be manipulated by technology. And then there were 2 essays that the 5 original co-authors did in like pairs of 2. One focused on the first 5 principles that's much more kind of like focused on the human person and the family, and that was in The New Atlantis, and one kind of focused on the economy and kind of statecraft, and that was published in National Affairs. And then, they got a bunch of people to sign on to it. It's already spurred conversations within the Trump administration, some of the domestic policy makers there, and then also in some of the states. So, I shouldn't say who, but, we've already had a governor, if not more, who have reached out wanting to talk about what this would look like implementing it in their state. Yeah. So let me leave it there and invite follow-ups. But I mean, I encourage our listeners to read it. It's not that long.
Mm-hmm.
You can read the 2 essays that kind of elaborate on it. And it's
very accessible. You don't have to have like a tech vocabulary to understand. And you know what, Ryan, I was thinking when I read the letter, how reflective it was of what, you used to hear about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, that they didn't let their own children have cell phones. And my husband is an IT engineer. He works in IT security, and he's not on any social media, and, doesn't let our kids do it very much either. So the people who actually work in this sphere, they put guardrails around their participation and access for younger children to it. Are you seeing anything, any response to the letter from anyone in the tech world that they want to contribute or they want to explore further with you your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. So we're co-sponsoring an event. It's at the American Enterprise Institute. I want to say it's in 2 weeks, and it's based upon this statement of principles. And one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz, oh, I'm blanking on her name right now, but she's going to be giving the keynote.
Oh, is it Catherine Boyle?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
You probably know her because I mean, like,
Yeah, she's an old friend. Yeah.
Georgetown undergraduate, student of Father Shaw's, used to be a journalist before she went into kind of like the venture capitalism and technology space. And so, yes, I do think some of the smartest technology people realize that we have to think about this ethically. I'm going to be in Rome in March for a conference on AI, and it's like an interfaith gathering to start thinking through some of this. And so some of the concerns that the statement raises are like traditional, like bioethical concerns that any one of our listeners would be familiar with. What do we do about the beginning of life and like reproductive technologies? What do we do about the end of life and like assisted suicide, right? And there are various ways that technology can undermine human dignity. But then there are new questions. What does this do to childhood, right? What does it do to children? Some of the stuff that Claire's been working on. What does this do to the labor market, right? Our jobs are not the ones that are most likely to be automated tomorrow. But what if it happened that like a year from now, every big rig truck was a driverless automatic driving truck? Because like that is like stable employment for blue collar men, and it would have huge implications for how we think about like the labor market then impacting like the marriage market. You talk to people like Brad Wilcox and they say, look, one of the reasons that we see declines in marriage rates is that we've seen declines in the labor market for men. And these aren't so-called marriageable men. And so we should think about like how is technology going to displace certain industries and certain workers, and what is the speed at which this happens? Like none of us want to say, well, the automobile put the horse and buggy out of business, and therefore we should have had protectionism for horse and buggy. Like we're not Luddites, but we do want to think about like what's the rate of change, like how quickly can families and communities adapt to job displacement in labor markets? How should we think about privacy concerns? Surveillance capitalism in essence. Every one of our devices is tracking everything we're doing. How should we think about the right to privacy, not just vis-a-vis the government, but vis-a-vis big tech? Anyway, so actually, last thing I'll mention is that one of the things that Anna and I have been deliberate about, like with our own children, is that like, do we want to just be consumers? Or do we also want to be producers of culture, producers? We live on a farm, so we raise and slaughter animals and harvest vegetables, like stuff like this. But there is a way in which you can think of how modern technology has really, really emphasized the consumption aspect of modernity and not the production side. So even the fact that everyone can put in earbuds and listen to their own music, but it used to be that people would play the piano and violin and cello and make music in their living room. Right. And you can think about how we currently have like the best technology for teaching people how to play music. There's some really good online courses to teach yourself how to play musical instruments, but we don't avail ourselves of that as much. Right. It's easier to be a passive consumer than an active producer. And so I think the agency question really, weighs heavily on me, is that are we giving away more and more distinctively human agency where the technology becomes a substitute rather than a supplement?
Well, going back just up to the 10,000 foot level, Ryan, what other opportunities do you see that the pro-family, pro-life community might have with this new administration?
Oh, sure. So one, I mean, if you think about like J.D. Vance, both when he was running for Senate, when he was a senator, when he was running for vice president, and then the address that he gave at the March for Life, he may be like the most like pro-family policy national Republican leader that we've ever had. And so for debates, I don't know when this will air, but as we're recording, like earlier today, our colleague Patrick Brown had an event on Capitol Hill with Ramesh Ponnuru from National Review, with Tim Carney from AEI. And then there were two other. One was the House member who's introduced the kind of Family Tax Act, and then one. Oh, I'm blanking on her name. Anyway, this is why I shouldn't have tried to run through all of the names. I knew I would forget someone. But the basic idea here was the what was it? The Tax Cuts and Job Act, the Trump first administration tax bill, is about to expire. And the question is like, when they renew this, are they going to include the increased child tax credit? Trump had increased the tax credit during the child tax credit during the first administration. Are they going to keep that, or are they going to get rid of it? And how you think about things like a baby bonus, right? JD Vance at one point, if I remember correctly, said he wanted a $5,000 baby bonus, and then like the week later, Kamala Harris was like, "Well, I want a $6,000," and it was clearly like, I don't have any actual proposal, so I'm just going to take what he's doing and make it a little bit more generous. It's a $2,000 child tax credit that's being discussed. I think these things are all to the good. I don't think anyone gets married because they're going to get a $5,000 baby bonus or a $2,000 tax credit, right? That's not what motivates. I mean, you're both moms. That's not what motivates you in your motherhood. But it would make your life a little bit easier as you're raising kids and like money is tight to, get to save $2,000 a year per child on your federal income taxes. Like that's not nothing. I think on the pro-life side, during the campaign, some of the rhetoric that was used was disappointing to say the least.
Yeah, not helpful.
Both about leaving it to the states, which I think is just inaccurate. There is a federal role, but then also like some of the abortion pill stuff. It's the leading cause of death of the unborn. And so I think pro-life community needs to, put pressure on the Trump-Vance administration that last time you guys put the justices on the court that overturned Roe, this time we need to see you now move the ball down the court, right? And it can't just be that you're living on the legacy from the first term. Like we actually need to see pro-life wins in this administration, whether that's returning the safety regulations on the abortion pill that the Biden administration got rid of, whether that's defunding Planned Parenthood and then sending all of that money to pregnancy resource centers. And there are a variety of things that can be done. I think we as pro-lifers can't allow ourselves to be cheap dates, right? It can't be that because you're not as bad as those guys, right? But you also got to do some good things.
Well, especially since there's so much consensus in this country about a lot of abortion things.
Well, we certainly have our work cut out for us, and we thank you for all the work that you're doing, Ryan. Our listeners, please go out and ask Amazon, try to get a copy of When Harry Became Sally so that poor Amazon has to go buy en masse Ryan's book that they banned. We're so happy to see that back for sale. And to learn more about Ryan's work and the Ethics and Public Policy Center, you can go to eppc.org. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you. This was fun.
Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire, and we are happy to have our beloved Monsignor Roger Landry with us. You all know him as a member of our team who's provided us with wonderful and thought-provoking homilies at the end of each program. But now with his new position and schedule, he is joining us in person every week to touch base on all the great things he is doing as the National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies. And we really can't thank you enough for all that you do for us, Monsignor. You've been part of our TCA team as our honorary chaplain, and our listeners have loved listening to your homilies for 6 years now and counting. So first, I just wanted to say thank you for all that you've done for us, Monsignor.
Well, it's been a true honor, Ashley, and I'm not just a regular guest on the program and the chaplain for Conversation with Consequences, but I'm also a faithful listener. And I enjoy on these rides back from New York to Massachusetts to see my folks and other things to be able to binge listen to Conversations with Consequences. And so proud of what we've been able to accomplish together over the last 6 years and where we're going.
Well, it's been a wonderful journey. And before we get into where you're now going now in your new role, we wanted to talk about some exciting news. The news last week that the Shrine Our Lady of Martyrs has been given national recognition. I personally love this shrine. I've been to it with my husband and children. He's from upstate New York. His father actually proposed to his mother, my mother-in-law there. And the North American martyrs, I don't know, they're special to us. My daughter was Saint Kateri Tekakwitha for Halloween. My husband's reading the story of Isaac Jogues to our son. But tell us about this exciting news and your role in it.
So several years ago, I was asked to be a board member of Friends of Our Lady of Martyrs, which is the nonprofit that runs the now national shrine of Our Lady of Martyrs in Orriesville, New York. This is after tabernacles in our 17,000 churches and after the souls of newly baptized babies, what I like to call the holiest place in our country, because it's associated with 4 of the 10 saints in American history. First, the 3 North American martyrs, St. Isaac Jogues, a priest who was martyred in 1646, Saint René Goupil, who was martyred 4 years earlier, and Saint Jean de Lalande, who was martyred there with Saint Isaac Jogues just a day after. And then in the soil fertilized by their blood, 10 years after Isaac's and John's martyrdoms, St. Kateri Tekakwitha was born there. Tertullian, 1800 years ago, used to say that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of Christians. And we see that there, that the blood of the North American martyrs did not just produce the seed of a Christian, but a Christian saint. And so 4 saints associated with the same plot of land in upstate New York, which is about 30 miles northwest of Albany. And so I've always been honored, because I have a devotion to the saints in general and to the North American martyrs and St. Kateri in particular, to serve on that board. We've hosted some incredible activities there, like a little bit over a year ago, the New York State Eucharistic Congress was held there with 10,000 people fitting into what's called the Colosseum. It's the largest church edifice in the entire hemisphere. North and South America, it seats close to 10,000 people. It's got 70 doors all the way around in a Colosseum-like format. And those 70 doors symbolize the 70 disciples who were sent out to proclaim the gospel by Jesus and peers. And so we've all been sent out, every one of us, with our baptism and by our confirmation, continue the work of the North American martyrs. And so the big news that came was after there was a shift. So this whole shrine was founded in 1885. And then eventually, 100 years ago, this year, this June, the North American martyrs were beatified, not just the 3 who died in Orriesville, but the 5 who died in Ontario, Canada. All 8 of them were beatified by Pope Pius XI. And in 1930, they were canonized. And as the canonization was being prepared for, they started to build that incredible Colosseum on the property. And it's been standing now for 95 years. We've had to renovate it. We've had to keep it state of the art. The Knights of Columbus have helped us tremendously up there. But it is an extraordinary place to make a pilgrimage, to go and pray, and to be strengthened, because it is a place of courage where just walking on that territory, we are able osmotically almost to be infused with the courage that made Saints Isaac, Saints Rene, and Saint Jean be willing to give their life for the faith, leaving their native France and evangelizing the Mohawks. It's also the place in which we can learn, especially from Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, what's most pleasing to God. That was her question before she was baptized. And once she found out what that answer was, to love God with all her mind, heart, soul, and strength, that's what she did over the last 4 years of her life. She died at the tender age of 24, but she spent the time adoring the Lord Jesus as much as she could, spending as much time with him as she could. She was the first consecrated virgin in North American history. And so she shows the first love we're always supposed to have for God. And so what a place to go. I would encourage all the listeners of Conversations with Consequences to make a pilgrimage to Orriesville, New York, sometime during its open season, which is the beginning of May, all the way through the Feast of the North American Martyrs, which is October 19th, and find out for themselves how we leave there changed than when we arrived, capable more boldly and effectively of loving God and bringing that love to others.
You know, something that's interesting about the United States is that, because we were a land that was discovered, so many of our saints were mission oriented. They were evangelizers. They weren't native. I mean, someone that I know my husband hopes will be a saint one day is Archbishop Lamy of Santa Fe. Some of those mission-oriented men and women from that part of the country in California, and they remind me of the North American martyrs. And they kind of
recover, Ashley, like Think about St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, who brought the faith, beginning with the Italians in New York, but then to New Orleans and Chicago and other places. Think about St. Junipero Serra, walking 5,000 miles, limping to bring the gospel, and found 21 different missions in California. Think about St. Rose Philippine Duchesne, who left her native France and evangelized the area around St. Louis. Think about St. Theodore Guerin, who a lot of Americans are unfamiliar with, who in Indiana started the schools that have educated generations of children. Think about St. John Neumann, who was a Redemptorist missionary from Germany, who eventually became the 4th Bishop of Philadelphia. Blessed Francis Xavier Seeloss, down in New Orleans, who died of yellow fever, caring. They were all missionaries. And they show us that each of us in our faith doesn't have a mission, but is a mission, that we are all missionary disciples in Jesus. And so we are strengthened by these extraordinary heroes to ask the question, to whom can I share the treasure of my faith today? And if we have that zeal and appreciation for people who would leave their native land and go far away from home in order to share the faith, then it's much easier for us to knock on our next door's neighbor.
Well, speaking of mission, tell our listeners, what is the Pontifical Mission Societies, and what is your new role there as the head of that organization?
So I was appointed by the Vatican's Dicastery for Evangelization as National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies, which are 4 societies. The first is the Society of the Propagation of the Faith, which many of the listeners might remember because it was what Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen led for 16 years, and where he gave his inheritance, and he really loved the missions. That was his first love, in a sense, we could say. And so he directed the Society of the Propagation of the Faith, and how honored I am to have him as my predecessor here. It was founded in 1822 by Blessed Pauline Jericho, just getting a whole bunch of factory women together in circles of 10, praying each day for the missions and giving 1 penny, 1 sou a week for the care of the missions. And where'd the money first go? It went to the Diocese of Louisiana, which covered all from the Florida Keys up to the Canadian border, basically the Louisiana Purchase plus Florida. That's what she helped. She likewise helped. I know that you're in the mid-Atlantic states. It helped Kentucky. Her first care was to spread the faith in the Diocese of Bardstown, Kentucky, which was stretching in the nation's capital down from Baltimore. Second society is the Missionary Childhood Association, founded by Bishop Charles Forbin-Janson, who was a great missionary in the U.S. before he founded it, to try to help children help other children in missionary territories. And so we work with dioceses to basically adopt schools in other countries so that they can come to get to know the same Jesus we love. The third society is the Society of St. Peter the Apostle, which helps seminarians and religious novices all over the world. We're subsidizing 41,000 seminarians and novices so that they're able to follow their vocation to serve the Lord and serve us with all that they've got. And the last society is called the Missionary Union, which originally was to try to help cloistered men and women who could never travel to the missions because they were in a cloister, pray for them, just like St. Teresa, the Child Jesus, St. Teresa of Lisieux did from her Carmel in France. And now it's involving lots of other people in praying for the missions, and especially those on the front line of sharing our faith. So 4 mission societies, all of which are united in the Pontifical Mission Societies that I run. And so if people would like to find out more, the website is pontificalmissions, plural.org, pontificalmissions.org, where we've got descriptions about the holy founders of these various organizations, as well as the good that we're trying to do with the generosity of American Catholics to share the gift of our faith across the globe. We help out in 1,124 missionary dioceses in territories in Africa, in Asia, in rural areas of Latin America, in the islands of the Pacific, and in Oceania. So there's a lot of work to do, and we're grateful for all the help people give.
Wow. Well, they're lucky to have you in charge. You're the most tireless, indefatigable person I know. So, and I never cease to be amazed. I've been a Catholic now for 15 years. There seems to be no end to the good work that the church is doing, and it's something I'm so grateful for. You mentioned prayer, Father. Just in conclusion, what could our listeners, do you have a particular prayer intention right now?
Yeah, I would be super grateful if people would be able to pray specifically for a rebirth in missionary spirituality among all Catholics in the U.S. most parishes will have each year a priest or a religious come in as what we call a missionary cooperative, in which they speak about the missions and a collection goes to help whatever activity they're doing. And I've found over the course of time, including as a pastor, that a lot of generous American Catholics give out a charity because it's obvious the huge needs that are there. But I'd love to be able to shift that we're not giving just out of generosity, but that we're giving out of our own identity. Fulton J. Sheen used to say, we're all missionaries. Some of us actually go to mission territories. Most of us stay and support mission territories by our prayers first, by our sacrifices, meaning especially our mortifications and things like that, our sufferings, offering up that great currency of prayer for when we accept and unite to Christ what we're enduring. And then third, by the financial contributions we can give so that those who are courageous enough to leave mother, father, brother, sister, children, and lands in order to go to the missions, whether it's religious or priests or lay people, that they have the resources they need to complete their work. And so to shift from a culture just of charity, which is good, to an even greater notion of missionary identity, so that we recognize that we're all missionaries and that it's all hands on deck to be able to support this generation's of apostolic souls, just like former generations supported not just the Diocese of Louisiana, like Blessed Pauline Jericho, but also those who supported the great Jesuit missionaries who gave their blood for the faith in Orisville, like Saints Isaac, John, and Renee.
Well, thank you, Father or Monsignor. We'll certainly be praying for that noble intention of a rebirth of missionary spirituality, and we thank you for all you're doing to spearhead that. So thank you for your time, Monsignor. God bless.
Talk to you next week.
I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Mary Fiorito.
And what a treat it is for us to have today a dear friend, Father Dominic Legge. He's known to many across the country as the director of the Thomistic Institute, and he's also an associate professor of dogmatic theology at the Dominican House of Studies. Welcome to the show, Father.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Ashley. Mary?
So, Father, St. Dominic is in the news. Certainly been a lot of years since the death of St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Dominican order is one of the oldest and most beloved orders in the Catholic Church. So, tell us about this anniversary and the state of the Dominicans today.
Well, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, this is a great year for us. We've just come to the conclusion of the 750th anniversary of the death of St. Thomas Aquinas. So he died in 1274. 1274 he died. So the entire year, 2024, up until the Feast of Thomas Aquinas, January 28th, 2025, was designated as a kind of jubilee by Pope Francis. We celebrated it with some solemnity, and including the visit of the skull of St. Thomas Aquinas to the United States and a number of locations in the U.S. The skull of Aquinas came here to our Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and we were really delighted to be able to host that a very important relic of such a great saint and philosopher, theologian, scholar, such a great figure for the Catholic Church and the Western intellectual tradition.
So, Father, my husband and I are in a mixed marriage because he went to a Dominican high school and I went to a Jesuit one. So, but we got a dispensation to get married. So it's all good now. But, and now we live in a Dominican parish. And I was struck just, when we started to go to Mass there. I mean, there really is a difference in the way Dominicans are formed as opposed to diocesan priests or Jesuits. There's kind of a difference in emphasis on preaching, for example. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the charism of the Dominicans and what makes it unique?
Yeah. Well, so the Dominican order is called the Dominican order because it's named after St. Dominic, who was the founder of the Dominicans. St. Dominic died, he was the generation before Thomas Aquinas, and we just celebrated the 800th anniversary of the founding of the Dominican order a number of years ago. And so we have St. Dominic as our father, and who set the order up and got it moving as a kind of intellectual order that also has an important connection to the monastic life. So if you think about religious orders in, say, the early Middle Ages, going back into the first Christian millennium, you have, you had hermits, but those developed into monasteries of monks. And in the West, the greatest example of this would be St. Benedict. So you have the Benedictines, and then you have other religious communities which are, related to St. Benedict, like, for example, the Cistercians or the Trappists, who are different reform strands within the larger Benedictine inspiration, or the larger Benedictine monastic movement. St. Dominic comes along in the 13th century, and he was not a monk, but he was a priest, and it seems a canon of a cathedral in Spain. But traveling through southern France, he encountered these heresies, and he wanted to preach to them. And he ended up developing a religious order which had a lot of the monastic life as part of its way of life. So living in community, praying the Liturgy of the Hours in common, living a kind of life of evangelical poverty, but also preaching in the cities. So unlike a Benedictine monastery, Dominican priories were in the city, not out in the countryside. And especially St. Dominic sent his early friars to the new universities, which were just developing in Europe. So Dominicans were trying to preach in the universities, also teach in the universities. So preaching and teaching, the original mission of the Dominican order, which was founded to be an order of preachers. So Dominicans have OP after their names. That stands for, in Latin, Ordo Predicatorum, or Order of Preachers. And St. Thomas Aquinas joined this new order in the 13th century. He met them in Naples while he was a student at the University of Naples. He had been a student as a young boy at the great Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino. That's the place where St. Benedict really founded the Benedictine order in a certain sense, the principal monastery of the Benedictines. And St. Thomas was then sent to the new University of Naples, where he met a couple Dominicans, and he decided he wanted to be part of this new order. St. Thomas, in joining the order, was immediately sent on for higher studies and spent the rest of his life basically teaching and preaching, but often in academic contexts. And he ended up producing some of the greatest works of philosophy and theology that we have in the West. That's a little bit of, how that grew out of the inspiration of St. Dominic.
Mm-hmm. This new, computer-generated image of St. Thomas Aquinas that was revealed this past week. I saw, I guess they were able to take his skull and then sort of generate what he would have looked like in real life. That seems to be garnering a lot of interest on social media.
That's right. It's a really fascinating story. So Aquinas's skull and the rest of his relics were for a very long time and still kept in the Dominican Church in Toulouse, France. Actually, this project got going not as an attempt to image the skull or reconstruct the face of Aquinas, but to do a study of the skull to see if they could determine the cause of his death. That's actually very interesting. It does show up in these articles, but it doesn't make as much of a splash. But honestly, as someone who's worked historically in the chronology of Aquinas' life, this is very interesting because there is this episode at the end of Aquinas' life where he stopped writing, and people wondered, why did he stop writing? And then he died while journeying from Naples to the Council of Lyon. So the Pope had asked Aquinas, who was then living in Naples, to go to Lyon, France, where a church council was about to begin, and he was supposed to be a theological expert. He died while traveling. And the stories about his death are that he hit his head on a tree branch as he was journeying, and it seems that he was already not feeling well, so he was riding on a donkey, and the donkey went under the tree branch, and he didn't duck low enough and hit his head on the tree branch, and then he was not feeling well, and he lingered for a number of weeks after that. I don't remember exactly how long. It was 6 weeks or something.
My goodness.
Their investigation of the skull was able to confirm that this person, and we think it's Aquinas' skull, so that would mean Aquinas, died of a chronic subdural hematoma. So they were able to determine that from looking at the skull, that it was in fact a brain, a traumatic head injury.
Wow.
That had lingered for a long time that produced his death. So that's actually really interesting, just if you want to get into the story of Aquinas' death. But as a part of that, then they did this imaging study to try and reconstruct the face of Aquinas. And that has gotten a lot of splash on social media. But of course, these reconstructions of faces are a little hypothetical.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's,
a little
to
bit.
me, it was more the public interest in it, more so than the picture itself, which was, of course, interesting. But that so many people who are not Catholic and stuff would have this fascination with what he actually looked like. It's just funny how these things are, they capture the public imagination for some reason.
Father, tell us how the Dominicans came to be nicknamed Hounds of the Lord or Dogs of the Lord.
Yeah, so Dogs of the Lord, and if you look at the iconography of Saint Dominic, you'll often see a dog, sometimes a dog with a torch in its mouth, and that's actually like really cool as a logo. So we're very happy about that. Where does that come from? Well, in one sense, you could say it's the name Dominican. The Dominicans are named after Saint Dominic, but in Latin, Dominicanes. But if you break that word up into Domini canes in Latin, that means literally dogs, canes, of the Lord, Domini. And so Dogs of the Lord became like a nickname for the Dominicans. But it's also rooted in one of the stories around St. Dominic's birth. So there's a story in the early accounts of the foundation of the order that St. Dominic's mother, whose name was Jane of Aza, had a dream while she was pregnant that she gave birth to a dog. And the dog ran over to the fireplace, grabbed a burning log out of the fireplace, and then ran around the whole world, setting the world on fire. And this was then, kind of repeated as a kind of prophetic dream that her son was going to become a great preacher and set the world on fire with the gospel.
And the Dominicans have sort of a special relationship with the Franciscans, where once a year you trade pulpits and a Dominican will preach in a Franciscan parish and vice versa.
So the Dominicans and the Franciscans were founded at almost exactly the same time, very, very close in time at the beginning of the 13th century. And there has long been there's a tradition, like a pious tradition, that St. Dominic and St. Francis met probably in Rome. And there's been some actually historical research into this because, of course, they both would have come to Rome to get papal approval for their new orders. And those papal approvals came very close to each other in the early part of the 13th century. And I just heard that there's a Dominican historian who's done a lot of research on St. Francis, who now is of the view that this meeting did in fact really happen. So it seems possible. It certainly is possible that the two of them met, and there is this tradition that they did meet. If you go to the Dominican church in Rome, which is the headquarters of the Dominican order, Santa Sabina, which is on the Aventine Hill in Rome, that church was entrusted to St. Dominic by the Pope in the 13th century. And St. Dominic lived there for a while. St. Thomas Aquinas also lived there. But you have there the original cell, the monastic cell or room where St. Dominic slept, his bedroom. And there's a marble inscription over it that says that it was here that St. Dominic and St. Francis met and had conversation through the night about how they're trying to spread the gospel in the middle of their time. So that has inspired Dominicans and Franciscans to always regard themselves as like really brothers, and therefore to have a Dominican come to a Franciscan church to preach on St. Francis Day, and then the Dominicans invite a Franciscan to come to their church on St. Dominic's Day to preach, to kind of manifest that fraternity.
Father, we only have a couple minutes left, but tell us about the Thomistic Institute and how it's gone global.
Yes, this is, so I'm the director of the Thomistic Institute. The Thomistic Institute started as a research institute, an academic research institute of the Dominican House of Studies here in Washington, D.C. But we realized about 8 years ago that there was a lot of interest in what we were doing on secular university campuses, both from faculty, but also from students, even undergraduate students. And we began offering the opportunity to some of these undergraduates to form clubs on their local campus. So this would be like we started at Brown and Yale and then MIT and Harvard. So totally secular schools. But we said to these students, if you form a club on your campus, we will help you bring Catholic speakers to your campus to speak about like the questions that you're interested in. So we help the students organize the talks, and we put them in touch with the speakers. And, we're really coaching the students from afar. But the students are really the protagonists of these chapters. And then we pay the costs of the speaker to go to the campus. So we started doing that in 2016 with first 2 chapters, then 4. And now it's spread. We're at almost 100 campuses in the US and also England, Ireland, It started to happen in Europe. We've got a budding chapter in Australia, Mexico, Brazil is starting. The Philippines wants to start their own Thomistic Institute. We're getting inquiries from Indonesia, in Asia. It's marvelous. So it's obviously tapped into a great demand, and it's turned into a big operation of bringing the wisdom of Aquinas and the Catholic intellectual tradition to students on secular schools, for the most part, secular campuses, who are really hungry for the truth and are not finding these answers from the classes that are being offered on their campus.
Well, certainly the Dominicans are a thriving order. I think I told you this story. I was recently in Paris and found myself at a Dominican church, and it was exploding. I mean, it was standing room only. And so it seems wherever the Dominicans go, so too does a healthy zeal for the faith. So we thank you, Father Dominic. And to learn more about the Thomistic Institute, you can visit the ThomisticInstitute.org. And thank you, Father, for your time today.
Thank you. God bless you.